Marcus Webb had never heard of Secure, Contain, Protect. Of course he hadn't. It was March 14th, 2003, and the Foundation hadn't found it yet. Marcus worked overnight security at a private art storage facility in Portland, Oregon. Not a museum exactly, more like a warehouse for rich people's taste. The kind of place where a collector buys something at an estate sale, runs out of wall space at home, and pays someone else to keep it climate-controlled and forgotten. Marcus had worked there 6 years. He knew every corner, every flickering fluorescent light, every draft that came through the loading dock when the wind shifted off the river. He did not know what was waiting for him in Storage Room C that night. He found it around 11:15. A statue he had never seen before. No acquisition tag, no delivery notice, no name on any clipboard he could find. Roughly 2 meters tall. Poured concrete. Reinforced with rebar, you could see pressing through the surface in places, like bones under skin. Its face was crude, unfinished looking, but the eyes had been painted on with something dark red. Not spray paint, not marker, and they were pointed directly at the door. Marcus stood in the doorway for about 30 seconds. He told himself later, in the version of this story he almost got to tell, that he wasn't scared, he was just confused. Statues don't get delivered without paperwork. That was the rule. He stepped inside, pulled out his clipboard, turned to check the room number plate on the wall behind him. He blinked once. The police found his body at 11:42 p.m. after a silent alarm triggered when his radio stopped transmitting. The official report listed cause of death as a severe fracture of the cervical vertebrae. Consistent, the medical examiner noted, with a fall from height, or with an impact of extraordinary force applied to the base of the skull. There was no fall. There was no impact they could identify. There was only the statue, standing 3 feet closer to the door than where Marcus had last seen it, and a man on the floor who had been alive 11 minutes ago. The Foundation's retrieval team arrived 72 hours later. By then, the Portland PD had classified it as an open homicide. They would never close it, and the statue stood in the corner of Storage Room C, concrete and rebar, and those dark red eyes, waiting for someone else to look away. The only person who knew what happened in that room that night is gone. But what came out of that room is still here, and it's still waiting. Before we talk about the monster, let's talk about what makes it unbearable. Not the speed, not the strength, the normalcy. There is an organization that most people will never hear about. They have no public office, no government website, no press releases. They don't have a name you'd recognize if someone said it at a dinner party. They are called the SCP Foundation. That's Secure, Contain, Protect. And their entire reason for existing is to find things that should not exist and make sure the rest of the world never has to know about them. Think about what that job actually means. Every city, every country, every stretch of ocean and desert and mountain range in the world. The Foundation has people there. Not soldiers exactly. Scientists mostly. Researchers. People who have looked at enough impossible things that impossible stopped being a meaningful word. They find anomalies. Objects, locations, entities that break the rules the rest of us assume are permanent. They contain them. They study them, and they write everything down in reports that almost no one will ever read. By 2003, the Foundation had been doing this for a long time. They had files on things that would end your sleep for a month if you read them over breakfast. They had protocols for entities that could rewrite memory, objects that could unmake physical matter, locations that existed in more than one place at the same time. They were not easily surprised. SCP-173 surprised them, not because it was the most dangerous thing they had ever encountered. It wasn't, not by their own metrics. Not because its abilities were incomprehensible. They weren't, once you understood the one rule. It surprised them because of what the one rule meant for every human being who had to be in the same room with it. The object is a statue, concrete and rebar, roughly humanoid, standing just under 2 meters tall. Its surface is uneven, poured in sections, it looks like, or assembled from pieces that were never meant to fit together cleanly. The face has features, but they are wrong in ways that are hard to describe and impossible to stop noticing. The eyes are painted on in a dark reddish-brown pigment that Foundation analysts have never been able to definitively classify. Early reports describe the substance as organic. Later reports say the same thing and add nothing further. Its origin is unknown. The Foundation has no record of who created it, where it came from, or how it ended up in a private storage facility in Portland. The style doesn't match any known artist or movement. The materials are consistent with mid-20th century construction, but the object shows no weathering consistent with that age. It is, the Foundation's terminology, anomalous in origin as well as behavior. Don't look away. That's the first rule you learn when you work with SCP-173. And the real problem, is that no one can follow it forever. That rule sounds simple when you first hear it. Stay in the room. Keep your eyes on the statue. Don't blink if you can help it, and you'll be fine. The Foundation built entire containment protocols around that principle. Multiple personnel required for any entry. Synchronized eye contact maintained at all times. Emergency lighting, redundant systems, backup procedures for every conceivable scenario, and still people died. Not because the protocols were wrong, because the protocols assumed that human beings could be reliable observers indefinitely, under any conditions, no matter how tired or stressed or afraid they were. And human beings cannot do that. That is not a failure of training or discipline. It is a biological fact that the Foundation ran directly into, repeatedly, for years. The thing about SCP-173 is that it didn't arrive with mythology attached. No folklore, no urban legend, no warning passed down through generations about the statue that moves when you're not looking. It just appeared, and the first people who encountered it had no frame of reference, no preparation, no reason to believe that the ordinary act of blinking could be the last thing they ever did. That is what makes it different from most of what the Foundation deals with. Most anomalies, when you understand them, become something you can reason about, something you can plan around. SCP-173 becomes more frightening the more you understand it. Because understanding it means understanding that the vulnerability it exploits is not a mistake. It is not a flaw you can fix. It is you. The Foundation didn't know that yet. In March of 2003, they were about to learn it the hard way. They always learn it the hard way. The Foundation's retrieval team arrived in Portland on March 17, 2003. 4 people. Standard anomalous object recovery protocol, which at that point meant they had equipment for almost everything except what they were actually walking into. The lead on the team was a field agent named Carver. No first name in any report I've found. Foundation personnel files have a habit of going sparse on details that don't affect the mission. Carver had done 14 object retrievals before Portland. He was considered experienced, the kind of person the Foundation sends first, precisely because he had seen enough that he didn't spook easily. He spooked in Portland. The team entered the storage facility at 9 in the morning, full lighting, all 4 personnel present. Standard procedure. 2 people maintain visual contact with the anomaly at all times, while the other 2 handle containment preparation. Simple. Clean. Carver had run versions of this protocol a dozen times. What the protocol didn't account for was the doorway. Storage room C had a single entrance, a standard commercial door, roughly 80 centimeters wide. To move a 2-meter concrete statue through that door, You need equipment. You need angles. You need, at certain moments, for people to be positioned in ways that put walls between them and what they're trying to move. Carver knew this going in. He adjusted. He thought he had adjusted enough. He hadn't. During the third repositioning attempt, a junior team member named Reyes shifted to brace the dolly from the left side. For approximately 1 second, the Foundation's own footage analysis confirmed this later. 1 second. Reyes's line of sight to SCP-173 was blocked by the doorframe. Reyes walked away with a fractured collarbone and a concussion. The medical report listed the injuries as consistent with being struck by a fast-moving blunt object. There was no blunt object. There was only SCP-173, which was now standing 4 feet from where it had been, close enough that Carver could have reached out and touched it. Carver did not touch it. Carver did not move. Carver held eye contact with the statue for the remaining 6 hours of the operation and did not speak until they had it in the transport container and the doors were sealed. The team member who died was not Reyes. His name was Osei Mensah. He was 29 years old. He had been with the Foundation for 3 years, transferred from a research division to field work 8 months before Portland. He died during transport, not in the storage room, not during the retrieval, but in the back of the vehicle, during a moment that the surviving team members have described in varying ways in their after-action reports, but that all agree on in one detail. Someone blinked at the wrong time, and then Osei was on the floor, and then there was nothing any of them could do. The Foundation does not do funerals. They do reports. Osei Mensah became a data point. Incident 173-1A. 1 fatality during initial containment. Contributing factor: insufficient personnel for sustained visual coverage during transport. Recommendation: minimum 6 personnel for any future movement of SCP-173. 6. They had to learn that with a body. Dr. Elena Allison read the Portland report 2 weeks later in a Foundation site in rural Montana. She was 34 at the time, 8 years into her career as an anomalous object researcher, and she had developed what colleagues described as an unusually calm disposition toward the things she studied. Not detachment exactly. More like the kind of steadiness you build when you spend enough time around things that don't make sense. You stop expecting them to, and that somehow makes it easier. She read the Portland report twice. Then she read Carver's personal addendum, which was not standard procedure, but which the Foundation had included because Carver had written something that the reviewing committee felt was operationally relevant. It was 3 sentences. It doesn't rush. In 6 hours of eye contact, I never felt it trying to move. I felt it waiting. Allison put the report down. She looked at the ceiling of her office for a long time. Then she picked up a pen and wrote a note to the O5 Council requesting assignment as lead researcher on the new object. They approved it the same day. Later, she would describe that as the least surprising thing about the entire experience. Of course they approved it. They always approved requests for someone else to go near the thing that had already killed one of their people. That was how the Foundation worked. You volunteered, and they said yes. And then you found out why they said yes so fast. She drove to the containment site on a Tuesday in April. They walked her through the protocols. They showed her the footage from Portland. They opened the door to the observation room and let her look through the reinforced glass at SCP-173 for the first time. She stood there for 4 minutes without saying anything. When she finally spoke, she asked one question. Not about the mechanics. Not about the containment procedures. She asked, "How long has it been since anyone went inside the room with it?" 11 days, they told her. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "And in 11 days, has it moved at all?" They checked the interior cameras, the ones that ran continuously, capturing every angle of the containment chamber 24 hours a day. SCP-173 was standing in a different position than it had been in 11 days ago. No one had been inside the room. No one had been near it. And it had moved. Allison looked at that footage for a long time. Then she turned to the site director and said very quietly, "Your cameras aren't eyes, it already knows that." That was the first thing Elena Allison ever said about SCP-173. It would not be the most important thing she ever figured out. But it was the beginning. The rule is simple enough that it almost sounds like a joke. If you can see it, it cannot move. If you cannot see it, if your eyes are closed, if something is blocking your line of sight, if you look away for half a second to check on the person next to you, it moves. Fast enough that you will not see it move. Fast enough that by the time your eyes are back on it, it is already somewhere else. And the only evidence that anything happened is the distance between where it was and where it is now. That's it. That is the entire mechanic of SCP-173. One rule, and the Foundation spent the better part of 2 years trying to find the edge cases, the loopholes, the conditions under which the rule didn't apply. Because if there's one thing the Foundation is good at, it's finding the loophole. Every anomaly has one. Every impossible thing has some constraint, some boundary condition, some specific circumstance under which it behaves differently. SCP-173 did not cooperate with this assumption. The first question Allison's team asked was, what counts as observation? Because observation is a loaded word. A camera observes, a mirror reflects, a motion sensor detects. If any of those things counted, if SCP-173 responded to being captured on film the same way it responded to being watched by a human eye, then containment became dramatically simpler. You wire the room with cameras, you pipe the feed to a monitoring station, and you never have to send a human being in there again. They tested it within the first month. Cleared the room of all personnel, left 3 high-resolution cameras running from different angles, and watched the feed from outside. SCP-173 moved to the center of the room within 40 minutes. They tried mirrors next. Same result. They tried motion-triggered lighting. They tried pressure sensors in the floor. They tried a remotely operated camera on a motorized track that could maintain continuous visual coverage of the entire room without any human involvement whatsoever. Every single time, SCP-173 moved when no human eyes were present, stayed still the moment a person looked through the glass, like it knew the difference, like it could tell somehow between a lens and a pair of eyes attached to something alive. The Foundation has no explanation for this. The leading hypothesis, and they will tell you themselves it is a hypothesis, not a conclusion, is that SCP-173's immobility is triggered specifically by conscious human observation. Not light, not recording, not detection, attention. The active, living, conscious act of a human being, directing their awareness at it. If that's true, it means SCP-173 is not just reacting to physics, it is reacting to minds. Don't look away. Allison had written that on a laminated card and taped it to the inside of the containment room door at eye level. So it was the first thing personnel saw when they entered. She told her team it was a protocol reminder. But the way she said it, in the briefings, in the quiet moments before a scheduled entry, it sounded less like a rule and more like a prayer. Because both of them knew, everyone who worked with SCP-173 knew, that you cannot not look away. Not forever. Not even close to forever. The human eye blinks between 15 and 20 times per minute. Each blink lasts approximately 1/3 of a second. You cannot train yourself out of this. You cannot will yourself to stop. People have tried. The Foundation ran 3 separate studies on blink suppression techniques after Portland, and the results were consistent. You can reduce blink frequency under controlled conditions with chemical assistance for a limited period of time. You cannot eliminate it, and you cannot predict exactly when your body will override your intentions and blink anyway, regardless of what you want. SCP-173 does not need long. That is the thing. People imagine a monster that needs darkness, needs distraction, needs some significant window of opportunity to close the distance. SCP-173 needs 1/3 of a second. Less, possibly. The Foundation has never been able to measure its maximum speed because no measurement has ever captured it in motion. It is simply in one place, and then it is in another place, and the transition is invisible. What they do know is the outcome. Broken cervical vertebrae in most cases. Occasionally compression of the trachea. The throat, crushed from the outside by something that hit with enough force to collapse the structure entirely. No bruising consistent with a fist or a hand. The contact point, when forensics can identify one, is consistent with something narrow and very hard applied at high velocity. The rebar. The Foundation believes it uses the rebar, reinforcing its own body as the primary instrument of killing. A concrete statue, weaponizing its own skeleton. Think about that for a moment. Average human reaction time is 250 milliseconds. 1/3 of a second is 330 milliseconds. By the time your eye has finished blinking and your brain has registered that something has changed, SCP-173 has already done what it came to do. You will not see it happen. No one ever has. The Foundation knows this. SCP-173 knows this. And somewhere in the gap between those two facts, in that fraction of a second that your body steals from you without permission, 16 times a minute of every hour you spend in that room, that is where it lives. The Foundation is not an organization that stands at the glass and watches. They test. They push boundaries. They send people into rooms with things that have already killed other people, because the alternative, not knowing, is considered more dangerous than the cost of finding out. I want to be careful about how I say this next part. The people who designed these experiments were not monsters. They were scientists operating inside a system that had decided a long time ago that certain losses were acceptable in exchange for certain knowledge. Whether you agree with that calculus or not, it produced results. It also produced consequences that nobody fully accounted for. Here is what they did. Experiment 1. 18 months after Portland. The hypothesis: if blinking is the vulnerability, reduce the blink rate. A D-class personnel, the Foundation's term for individuals recruited from the prison population for high-risk testing, was given a topical ocular solution that suppressed the involuntary blink reflex. Not eliminated. Suppressed. The subject's blink frequency dropped from an average of 17 times per minute to approximately 4. They were then placed in the containment chamber with SCP-173, alone, with a single instruction: maintain eye contact. The subject maintained eye contact for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. That is longer than anyone had lasted alone in that room before. The Foundation considered it a partial success. At 11 minutes and 40 seconds, the subject's eyes, having been held open far beyond their normal tolerance, began to tear involuntarily. Vision blurred. The subject blinked 3 times in rapid succession to clear their sight. SCP-173 covered 6 feet in that window. The subject survived because they were standing close to the door, and a monitoring agent outside initiated emergency extraction within 4 seconds. The subject lost 3 fingers on their right hand, caught in the door during extraction, not from SCP-173 directly. The medical report noted this distinction carefully, as if it mattered. The conclusion: Chemical blink suppression extends exposure time, but does not solve the problem. It delays it, and a subject whose eyes have been held open past tolerance blinks more frequently afterward, not less, as the body compensates. You don't beat the blink reflex, you borrow against it. Experiment 2. 7 months later. New hypothesis. If one observer is vulnerable, 2 observers sharing the load should be safer. Split attention. Split risk. 2 D-class personnel were placed in the chamber together with a synchronized rotation protocol. Person A maintains eye contact, while Person B looks away, rests their eyes, blinks freely. Then they switch. Coordinated. Practiced. They ran the protocol in rehearsal outside the chamber for 2 full days before the live test. The live test lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds before SCP-173 killed one of them. The footage review took 3 weeks. What the analysts found was this. SCP-173 did not attack during a gap in the rotation. It attacked during the handoff, the specific moment when Person A was beginning to look away and Person B was not yet fully focused. That transition, which lasted less than 1/5 of a second, was when it moved. It had watched them practice. That was the only conclusion that made sense. It had observed their rhythm during the rehearsal entries, identified the moment of maximum vulnerability in their system, and waited for it. The Foundation's internal review used the word adaptive in the report summary. They flagged it with a recommendation for reclassification review. The reclassification was denied. SCP-173 remained Euclid. I'll let you decide what you think about that. Experiment 3. This one involved Raymond Cho. Raymond was D5891 in the Foundation's files. In his previous life, he had been a high school history teacher in Sacramento. He was 41 years old. He had been in Foundation custody for 7 months. By all accounts in his file, he was cooperative, calm, and possessed of what one researcher described as an unusual ability to remain focused under stress. They put him in the chamber with 2 other D-class personnel. 3 people, the minimum the Foundation now required for any entry. The protocol was the standard triangulated observation system Allison's team had developed. 3 observers positioned at equal distances, each responsible for a 120-degree arc, collectively covering the full 360 degrees around SCP-173 at all times. In theory, this was the closest thing to a safe entry the Foundation had yet designed. In practice, it lasted 9 minutes. One of the other 2 D-class personnel, a man named Torres, the file notes, though it does not note much else about him, lost his footing on the containment room floor. Not a dramatic fall. A stumble. The kind of thing that happens to every human being dozens of times a year. He caught himself. He was upright again in under 2 seconds. But for those 2 seconds, his sector of observation was uncovered. Torres died. The other unnamed D-class died. Raymond Cho pressed himself against the far wall, held eye contact with SCP-173 without blinking for what he later described as the longest 30 seconds of his life, and screamed for extraction until the door opened. He was the only one who walked out. The Foundation debriefed him for 6 hours. What he said in that debriefing is something we will come back to, because Raymond Cho saw something in those 30 seconds that changed what the Foundation thought they understood about SCP-173. Not during the attack, after it. In the stillness that followed, when it was just Raymond and the statue, and the sound of his own breathing, but that comes later. Experiment 4. I am going to tell you what I know about this one, which is less than I'd like, because significant portions of the record are redacted. What I can tell you is that a researcher on Allison's team proposed covering SCP-173's eyes. The painted-on eyes, the dark reddish-brown ones, whose substance was never conclusively identified. The hypothesis was straightforward. If observation is the mechanism, perhaps SCP-173 observes back. Perhaps its stillness is not purely reactive, but reciprocal. Perhaps covering its eyes would affect its behavior. They used a heavy canvas shroud, secured with industrial fasteners. 6 personnel in the room. Full protocol. The shroud was in place for approximately 90 seconds. What happened next is redacted from the primary report. What is not redacted is the aftermath. 2 personnel were removed from the site on medical grounds, neither of whom returned to active Foundation duty. A third requested immediate reassignment and was transferred within 48 hours. The containment chamber required structural repairs that took 11 days to complete. The shroud itself was not recovered. After Experiment 4, Allison submitted a formal request to suspend all direct testing on SCP-173 for a minimum of 6 months. The O5 Council approved it within the hour, not after deliberation. Within the hour. There are things the Foundation moves slowly on. This was not one of them. And sitting in her office that evening, reading the redacted sections she had clearance to see, and the rest of us do not, Allison wrote 4 words in her personal research journal that she later told a colleague she almost immediately regretted writing down. It was watching us. There is a version of this story that stays inside the reports. Incident logs, experiment summaries, containment breach analyses, clean language, passive voice, numbers where people used to be. The Foundation is very good at that version. It is the version that keeps the organization functioning, that allows researchers to come back to work the next morning and do the thing again. Because if you let yourself think too long about what the numbers represent, you eventually stop being able to do the work. I'm not going to tell you that version. Raymond Cho was released from Foundation custody 14 months after Experiment 3. Standard protocol for D-Class personnel who cooperate fully and survive long enough. The Foundation has a quiet arrangement with certain corrections facilities, and when it ends cleanly. New identity documents, a modest resettlement fund, a non-disclosure agreement that Raymond would have signed even without being asked, because who would he tell, and what would he say? He went back to Portland. Not Sacramento, where he had lived before. Portland, the city where none of this had started for him, but where all of it had ended. His caseworker at the Foundation noted this in a follow-up report and flagged it as psychologically significant. Nobody followed up on the flag. His neighbors in the apartment building on Burnside Street described him as quiet, polite, the kind of neighbor you know by sight, but not by name until something happens. He worked at a hardware store 3 blocks away. He paid his rent on time. He did not, as far as anyone could tell, sleep much. What the neighbors noticed, what eventually made it into the follow-up report, that a junior Foundation researcher filed 18 months after Raymond's release, more out of procedural habit than genuine concern, was the windows. Raymond never closed his curtains. Not at night, not in winter, not when the rain came sideways off the river and the temperature dropped below freezing. Every window in his apartment, always uncovered, always lit from inside. When a neighbor finally asked him about it directly, in the laundry room one evening, Raymond thought about the question for a long moment before he answered. Then he said, "I need to be able to see what's standing outside." The neighbor laughed, assuming it was a joke. Raymond did not laugh. In his Foundation debriefing, in hour 4 of 6, Raymond had been asked to describe what he experienced in the 30 seconds between the deaths of Torres and the other D-Class and his own extraction. The interviewing researcher expected trauma responses, dissociation, fragmented memory, the standard psychological signatures of acute stress. Raymond gave them something else entirely. He said, SCP-173 did not move during those 30 seconds. He said it stood exactly where it had been after the attack, and he held eye contact with it, and it was still. And then he said, but it wasn't the stillness of something that couldn't move. It was the stillness of something that had already done what it came to do, and was in no hurry about the rest. He said it felt like being looked at. The interviewing researcher noted this in the transcript, and moved on to the next question. It would be 6 more years before anyone connected Raymond's description to the data pattern that would become the turning point in everything the Foundation thought they understood. 6 years of that observation sitting in a file, correctly labeled, correctly archived, completely missed. Completely, Dr. Elena Allison read Raymond's transcript in her first month on the project. She underlined that sentence. She did not know yet what it meant. She would spend 9 years finding out. Don't look away. She had written it on the card by the door as a protocol reminder. By year 4, it had become something else. She started seeing it in her own handwriting in places she hadn't consciously written it. On the corners of her research notes, on the back of her hand when she woke up in the morning. Her therapist, Foundation approved, Foundation monitored, as all staff therapists were, noted a pattern of what she called intrusive procedural cognition. Allison told her that was a very clean way to describe it. By year 7, Allison had developed what she described in her own journal as a minor difficulty with enclosed spaces that lack sufficient ambient light. She did not call it fear of the dark, because she was not afraid of the dark. She was afraid of blinking in the dark, of the third of a second in which her eyes were closed, and she could not confirm what was or was not in the room with her. She knew rationally that SCP-173 was in a containment chamber in a facility in rural Montana, and she was in an apartment in the same facility's staff housing, and there were 17 security checkpoints between her and it. Knowing that did not help. The third of a second was still the third of a second. In year 9, she filed the transfer request. The reason she gave officially was personal health considerations. The reason she gave to the one colleague she trusted enough to be honest with was simpler. I can't follow the first rule anymore. I close my eyes and I wait for it. And eventually, the waiting is worse than whatever it would actually do. She left the project on a Thursday in October. She did not say goodbye to the containment chamber. She did not look through the observation glass on her way out. Later, she told that same colleague she had been afraid that if she looked, she would see it standing closer to the glass than it had been the last time. And she was more afraid of that than of almost anything else she could name. Not because it would mean the containment had failed, because it would mean it had known she was leaving. The Foundation logged her departure as a routine personnel transfer. They assigned a new lead researcher within 2 weeks. They updated the access roster, redistributed her caseload, and moved on, because that is what the Foundation does. The work continues. The object remains contained. The losses are documented and filed, and do not slow anything down. The number of D-Class personnel who died in direct contact with SCP-173 between 2003 and 2012 was 31. The Foundation's internal review classified all 31 as acceptable operational losses in the course of necessary research. 31 people. Each one of them had a name. Most of them, the Foundation's files do not record. Raymond Cho remembered all of their faces. He told the follow-up researcher that in the last interview he ever gave to the Foundation, he said he didn't know why he remembered them. He had only been in the room with 2 of them. But he remembered all 31. He had seen their files, he said. He had asked to see them, and someone had let him, and he had read every one. The researcher asked him why he had wanted to do that. Raymond looked out the window of his apartment on Burnside Street for a long time before he answered. Someone should know who they were, he said. It doesn't seem like anyone else was going to bother. There is a particular kind of wrong that is worse than ordinary wrong. Ordinary wrong means you had bad information, or you made a bad guess, or you didn't know something you couldn't have known. That kind of wrong is forgivable. It is the cost of operating in uncertainty, and every organization that deals in uncertainty makes peace with it eventually. The other kind of wrong is when the information was there the whole time. When someone underlined the right sentence 6 years before anyone understood what it meant. When 31 people died inside a pattern that nobody thought to look for because everyone was too busy looking at the object to look at the data. That is the kind of wrong the Foundation discovered in 2011. It started with a junior analyst named Park. Again, no first name in the accessible records, which at this point I have stopped finding surprising, who had been assigned the unglamorous task of reviewing and cataloging all recorded SCP-173 incident footage as part of a broader containment efficiency audit. Not a prestigious assignment, the kind of work you give to someone new, someone who hasn't been around long enough to find it tedious. Park had been with the Foundation for 11 months, fresh eyes. As it turned out, that mattered enormously. Park spent 6 weeks reviewing footage from 127 separate incidents involving SCP-173, containment entries, experiment sessions, 2 partial breaches, and 14 instances of unplanned personnel exposure dating back to the original Portland retrieval. They logged timestamps, personnel positions, SCP-173 positions, and outcomes. Standard cataloging work. The kind of thing that produces spreadsheets nobody reads, except Park read the spreadsheet. And Park noticed something. In 123 of the 127 incidents, SCP-173 killed the last person maintaining eye contact with it, not the first person to look away, not the person closest to it, not the person who stumbled or panicked or broke protocol. The last person still looking at it, the one who held on longest, the one who, in almost every case, was doing so deliberately, was staying focused so that someone else could move, could get to the door, could have a chance. 123 out of 127. The 4 exceptions all involved simultaneous loss of visual contact by all personnel, in which case SCP-173 appeared to select based on proximity rather than observation duration. Park flagged the finding and sent it up the chain. It reached Allison, retired from the project for 14 months by then, living in Vancouver, teaching a graduate seminar in anomalous materials research at a university whose name the Foundation had redacted from her personnel file, because someone on the current research team thought she should see it. Professional courtesy, possibly. Or possibly because they wanted someone else to be the one to understand what it meant first. She called the site within an hour of receiving the file. Don't look away. She had written that on a card and taped it to a door 8 years ago. Because it was the protocol. Because it was the rule. Because it was the only thing standing between the people in that room and something that moved faster than they could react. It had been the foundation of every containment procedure, every entry protocol, every training briefing for 9 years. It was a trap, not a trap. SCP-173 had said deliberately maybe. The Foundation was careful about that word in the internal review, careful not to assert intention beyond what the data supported. But the effect was identical to a trap. The protocol that was supposed to protect personnel had, in 123 documented cases, selected the most protective person in the room for death. The one who stayed, the one who held the line so others could move. That person died, every time. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about what you do, instinctively, when you are in a dangerous situation with other people. You check on them. You position yourself between them and the threat. You are the last one to leave, because you are making sure they got out first. Every cooperative survival instinct the human species has spent hundreds of thousands of years developing. SCP-173 had found the precise mechanism by which those instincts get you killed. It does not punish weakness, it punishes protection. The Foundation's formal review of the finding used careful, measured language. Terms like statistically significant behavioral pattern and potential adaptive targeting mechanism. The recommendation section called for a complete overhaul of containment entry protocols and suggested that the previous assumption of random opportunistic targeting be retired from all training materials. What the formal review did not say, what nobody wrote in any official document, but what every researcher who read Park's analysis understood immediately, was the implication that had been sitting in Raymond Cho's transcript for 6 years, underlined in Allison's handwriting, waiting for someone to catch up to it. It felt like being looked at. SCP-173 was not reacting to observation. It was responding to it. It was not a mechanism that happened to exploit a biological vulnerability. It was something that watched, something that assessed, something that, over the course of however many decades or centuries it had existed before a Portland storage facility, had learned exactly what human beings do for each other when they are afraid, and had learned to use it. The Foundation reclassified SCP-173's targeting behavior from incidental to adaptive on March 3, 2011. They did not change its containment class. It remained Euclid. 31 people, 123 incidents. And the thing they had gotten wrong was not a failure of protocol or equipment or preparation. They had looked at SCP-173 for 8 years and never asked whether it was looking back. Let's step back from the reports for a moment. Let's step back from the incident logs and the experiment summaries and the spreadsheet that changed everything and ask a different kind of question. What does SCP-173 actually tell us? Not about the Foundation, not about containment procedures or targeting patterns, or the logistics of keeping a concrete statue in a room in rural Montana. About us, about the specific shape of the thing it exploits, and why that shape exists, and what it means that something out there, something we cannot explain and cannot fully contain, found it and learned to use it. Here is the shape. Human beings are social animals. That is not a poetic observation. It is a biological fact with a very long history behind it. We survived not because we were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most individually capable species on the planet. We survived because we cooperated, because we watched each other's backs, literally. Because in a world full of predators, the animal that watches out for the animal next to it is the animal whose genes make it to the next generation. The instinct to protect, to stay, to be the last one out of the dangerous place so that someone else can be the first one safe. That instinct is not a choice. It is something written into us at a level far below conscious decision-making. SCP-173 kills the last person looking at it. The protector, the one who stayed. That is not a coincidence. And even if you refuse to call it intention, even if you insist that SCP-173 is a mechanism and not a mind, that the adaptive targeting pattern is an emergent behavior and not a strategy, the effect is the same. The most cooperative instinct in the human behavioral repertoire becomes, in the presence of SCP-173, a death sentence. Most of the things the Foundation contains are frightening because of what they can do. The scale of the damage, the breadth of the threat. There are anomalies in Foundation custody that could end cities, that could rewrite the laws of physics in a localized area, that could kill thousands of people before anyone understood what was happening. SCP-173 is not in that category. One room, one target at a time. By the Foundation's own metrics, it is a contained and manageable threat. But here is what keeps researchers up at night. And I think it should keep you up too. Every monster humanity has ever imagined. Every creature from every mythology and folklore tradition and horror story across every culture that has ever existed attacks from outside. It comes from the darkness, from the deep water, from the forest, from the sky. It is other. It is external. It is something that threatens you, a direction you can face and fight and potentially survive. SCP-173 does not attack from outside your defenses. It attacks through them. It finds the thing you do to protect the people you care about, and it turns that thing into the mechanism of your death. It does not defeat your humanity. It uses it. That is a different kind of frightening. Not the frightening of something that is stronger than you. The frightening of something that understands you. And here is the question I cannot stop thinking about. The one I don't have an answer to, and I'm not sure the Foundation does either. SCP-173 has existed, as far as anyone can determine, for a very long time. Before Portland. Before whatever facility, or location, or situation it occupied before Portland, which the Foundation has never been able to establish with any certainty. It has been in the presence of human beings, interacting with human beings, killing human beings, for long enough to develop a targeting pattern calibrated specifically to human cooperative behavior, which means it has had a very long time to learn. And if it has been learning, if the adaptive targeting is not a fixed feature, but an ongoing process, something that refines itself with every interaction, every incident, every spreadsheet that some junior analyst catalogs 6 weeks into their Foundation career. Then, what has it learned since 2011? What has it learned since the last time anyone who wasn't already inside a Foundation facility was in the same room with it? What is it learning right now, in a containment chamber in rural Montana, with nothing to do and nowhere to go and all the time in the world, while the researchers on the other side of the reinforced glass take careful notes and think very hard about what it cannot do? SCP-173 is not the most dangerous thing the Foundation has ever contained. They will tell you that themselves, but it is the only thing they have ever contained that I believe is thinking about them back. The Foundation ran a simulation in 2013. I'm not supposed to know about it. I'm going to tell you anyway, because I think you deserve to understand what we are actually talking about when we talk about SCP-173 being contained, and what the word contained actually means in this context, and what happens if it ever stops meaning that. The simulation was called Internal Modeling Exercise 173. Omega. The scenario: SCP-173 is no longer in a containment chamber. It is in an open public space, not a building, a plaza. Pioneer Courthouse Square in Portland, Oregon, chosen partly for its geometry, and partly, I suspect, because someone in the Foundation has a dark sense of historical symmetry. A Tuesday afternoon in October, 1,140 people present based on foot traffic averages. The question the simulation was designed to answer was straightforward. How long before the first fatality? And what is the projected casualty rate over a 30-minute window? The answer was not straightforward. Here is what the Foundation's modeling team expected. A crowd that, large means a near-continuous field of human observation. 1,100 people, distributed across an open space, with natural lines of sight in every direction. The probability of any single moment in which SCP-173 is not being observed by at least one person approaches 0. In theory, a crowd is the safest possible environment. In theory, 1,100 pairs of eyes create a coverage matrix that no single entity could find a gap in. In theory, what the modeling team found when they ran the actual numbers was something that the lead researcher on the simulation described, in her summary report, as deeply counterintuitive and immediately obvious in retrospect. A crowd does not blink together, but it blinks constantly. At any given moment, across 1,100 people, statistical modeling projects between 90 and 140 individuals in the process of blinking. Not the same individuals, rotating continuously. A wave of momentary blindness moving through the crowd like a ripple, always present, never stopping. The coverage matrix that 1,100 pairs of eyes creates is not a wall. It is a net, and SCP-173 does not need a door. It needs a gap the size of 1/3 of a second. The simulation projected first fatality at between 4 and 7 minutes after exposure, depending on SCP-173's initial positioning and the crowd's natural movement patterns. It projected that by minute 15, the crowd's cooperative survival instincts, people grabbing each other, pulling each other away, positioning themselves between the threat and the people around them, would, based on the adaptive targeting pattern identified in 2011, accelerate the casualty rate rather than reduce it. By minute 30, the modeling team's median projection was 112 fatalities. Their high-end projection was 231. Their low-end projection was 68. There is no low-end projection that is acceptable. I want to be very clear about that. 68 people in a plaza in Portland on a Tuesday afternoon is not a best-case scenario. It is the floor of a range of outcomes that has no good version. Don't look away. The rule that started as a protocol became a prayer, became a trap, became the thesis of an entire containment philosophy built around a thing that punishes the people who follow it most faithfully. In Pioneer Courthouse Square, 1,100 people following that rule instinctively, without training, without preparation, without any understanding of what they were dealing with, would produce somewhere between 68 and 231 bodies in half an hour. Dr. Allison received a copy of the simulation results in Vancouver. She read it in her office between a 9 o'clock seminar and an 11 o'clock faculty meeting. She called the site afterward and spoke to the current lead researcher for 22 minutes. The content of that call is not in any file I have accessed. What is in a file, a personal note, filed with her Foundation personnel archive, dated the same day, is 4 sentences. The containment works. The containment has to keep working. There is no recovery protocol for 173 Omega. There is only the room and the door and the rule and the people willing to stand in there and follow it. You are listening to this right now, and while you have been listening, you have blinked somewhere between 50 and 80 times. Each time, for 1/3 of a second, your eyes were closed. And in a containment chamber in rural Montana, something that has learned to be patient is standing very still, waiting for a door to open. Marcus Webb never knew the name of the thing that killed him. That is the detail I keep coming back to. Not the Foundation's failures, not the 31 people in the incident logs, not the simulation with its careful projections and its unacceptable flaws. Marcus Webb, alone in a storage room in Portland on a March night in 2003, looking at something that had no label, no file number, no containment procedure built around it yet. Just a statue in a room that shouldn't have been there, and a man who turned away for 1/3 of a second, because that is what human beings do. Because we cannot do otherwise. Because we were never built for the thing we were about to need to survive. He did not know what it was. He did not know what he was supposed to do. He had no protocol, no training, no warning. He just turned around to check a room number on a wall, and that was the last thing he ever did. The Foundation has spent more than 2 decades making sure that what happened to Marcus Webb does not happen again. They built the protocols. They wrote the reports. They sent people into that room over and over until they understood, or believed they understood, exactly what they were dealing with. They contain it. They study it. They stand on the other side of reinforced glass and take careful notes and update the procedures when the procedures turn out to be wrong. And SCP-173 stands in its chamber in rural Montana and does not move and does not speak and does not do anything at all except wait for the next time someone opens the door and gives it a third of a second. It has been waiting for a very long time. It is not in a hurry. It has never been in a hurry. Carver understood that in 6 hours of eye contact in a storage room in Portland and wrote it down in 3 sentences that nobody took seriously enough for 6 years. And it is still true now. It doesn't rush. It waits. Here is the question the Foundation has never answered. Not in any report I have read. Not in any analysis or audit or internal review. Not in Allison's notes or Raymond's testimony or Park's spreadsheet or the 4 sentences Allison wrote the day she read about 1,100 people in a plaza and 68 bodies on the low end. What is it waiting for? Not the open door. Not the moment of inattention. Not the person who stays last because they are trying to protect someone else. Those are how it kills. Those are the mechanism. I mean the other thing. The longer thing. The thing it is doing in that room in Montana right now. In the dark between scheduled observation checks, in the silence between one researcher's shift and the next. What does something that has learned patience and learned human behavior, and learned to punish the people who love each other most, what does something like that want? I don't know. The Foundation doesn't know. Maybe that question doesn't have an answer. Maybe SCP-173 is exactly what it appears to be, and nothing more. A concrete statue with one terrible property, and no inner life, and no agenda beyond the next third of a second. Maybe. Don't look away. Of course, we both know you will. I will too. Everyone does. Eventually. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. But here, at the end of this, in the quiet after the reports and the experiments and the simulations and the 31 names that Raymond Cho memorized, because someone should, here is the thing I want to leave you with. Marcus Webb turned away for 1/3 of a second and did not know what was in the room with him. You do. Sleep well.